Imagine the following. You are in a relationship that consumes you. Sometimes it feels like the peak of passion, intense, vibrant, full of chemistry. But other times, it's like walking through a minefield. Words cut deeper than silence. Small gestures turn into arguments, and the simple act of wanting to breathe, to have space, becomes a source of guilt. Still, you stay, not out of convenience, not out of weakness, but because something inside you believes that this love is worth it, that this chaos is the price to pay for something profound. And here's the thing. Many toxic relationships don't reveal themselves as such from the start. They build up gradually, in layers. They begin with affection, commitment, promises. But at some point, almost imperceptibly, what was affection turns into control. What was care turns into surveillance. What was connection turns into dependency. And you don't see this clearly. You just feel like you are always in debt, as if loving means diminishing yourself. Perhaps you have been through something like this. Or maybe you know someone who is trapped in this cycle. People who say things like, "He is like this because he loves me too much." Or, "She is just insecure. She doesn't mean any harm," while justifying behaviors that actually drain their vital energy. Relationships where you feel guilty for wanting a little silence, where saying no is enough to trigger emotional blackmail, cold distancing, or unpredictable outbursts. And then comes the worst. You start to doubt yourself. Am I exaggerating? Is the problem me? This is one of the most subtle and dangerous traits of a toxic relationship. It distorts your perception of reality. It slowly undermines your self-confidence. It makes you confuse love with emotional survival. This video is not an accusation. It is not a judgment. It is an invitation to look honestly at the dynamics we call love, and that in fact may be poisoning our emotional health. Let's explore together the 7 psychological signs that you are in a toxic relationship based on some of the brightest minds in psychology. You won't hear shallow advice or self-help phrases here. What you will find are uncomfortable but liberating truths. Because sometimes all we need to break free from a destructive cycle is to see what was previously hidden. If you are ready to face this with courage, keep watching. What comes next may hurt, but it can also set you free. Some of the most toxic relationships are also the hardest to leave. Why? Because they offer us something that at first glance seems rare and valuable: intensity. Moments of emotional euphoria, passionate reconciliations after explosive fights, jealousy that seems to prove how much the other cares. It's like an emotional roller coaster, and each drop, each dizzying rise, reinforces the feeling that there is something deep there. But intensity is not synonymous with love. And this is one of the most dangerous misconceptions we can carry. Freud explained this clearly when he spoke of the compulsion to repeat, the unconscious tendency to seek emotional experiences that resemble childhood traumas. If you grew up in an unstable environment where affection and pain went hand in hand, your brain learned that love must come with suffering, that it is only real if it leaves you in doubt, if it knocks you off your feet, if it hurts. That's why, when you enter a relationship marked by emotional instability, you don't reject it, you recognize it. Erich Fromm also addresses this when describing the so-called symbiotic love, a type of bond in which two people merge into an illusion of unity but are actually trapped in a dynamic of dependency. In this type of relationship, drama becomes routine, and without realizing it, you start to confuse emotional turmoil with affective depth. You believe that if it hurts, it's because it's real. But the truth is harsh. Intensity is not love, it's imbalance. Healthy relationships are often calm, consistent, even boring for those addicted to emotional adrenaline. And this addiction is real. The brain releases dopamine in cycles of tension and relief, creating a kind of chemical dependency on the conflict itself. You get used to chaos. You start to think that love is something that throws you off balance, that consumes you. And here lies the cruelest point. This type of emotional bond is so powerful because it offers the illusion of depth. You think you've found someone who makes you feel like no one ever has before, when in reality, what you feel is the reactivation of an old pain that was never healed. And that's why, the more intense it is, the harder it seems to let go. But what happens when you start to believe that you can save this person? That, with enough love, this roller coaster will finally stabilize. In the next section, we will talk about one of the most common and dangerous patterns of toxic relationships: the desire to fix the other. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. You start to notice the destructive behaviors, the traits of emotional imbalance, the moments when the other pulls away, sabotages, explodes, and something in you awakens, an urgent need to heal, to help, to save. And suddenly, the relationship stops being just an emotional connection. It becomes a mission, a project. And you, without realizing it, take on the role of savior. This is an emotional trap disguised as altruism. The internal logic is subtle, but powerful. If I love enough, he will change. If I am patient, she will see how much she is hurting. If I endure a little longer, everything will be fine. The problem is that this narrative is not about the other. It is about you. It is about an emotional wound that cries out for meaning, for validation. And it tries to find that by turning the other into a reflection of your own shadow. Carl Jung was direct in describing this process as projection. You see unresolved aspects of yourself in the other. What you deny, repress, or do not want to face in your own psyche is projected onto the one you love. If you deny your own insecurity, you may be drawn to someone insecure and try to strengthen them. If you hide your anger, you may get involved with someone explosive and try to calm that side. It is an unconscious way of trying to heal yourself by fixing the other. Fromm also addressed this when talking about neurotic love, a type of conditional affection. I only feel worthy if I am useful, if I am needed, if I am indispensable. This type of love is never free. It needs to be earned through sacrifice. And that is where you get trapped in a cycle of chronic frustration. The more you try to help, the more frustrated you become. The more the other resists, the more you insist. And when things don't improve, you don't blame the other. You blame yourself for not having done enough. But there is a hard truth that needs to be said. You are not in a relationship. You are in an emotional battlefield, fighting against ghosts that are not yours. Trying to save someone who may not even want to be saved. And the more you try to fix them, the more you break in the process. And in the midst of all this, something even more dangerous happens. Little by little, you start to lose yourself. Your opinions, your desires, your boundaries begin to disappear. Everything starts to revolve around the other person, and when you realize it, you no longer know who you are outside of that dynamic. In the next section, we will talk about the loss of identity, one of the most silent yet most destructive signs of a toxic relationship. In the beginning, you still remember who you were. You had your own opinions, clear desires, defined dreams, but little by little, all of that starts to dissolve. What do you like? It depends. What do you want? I don't care. What do you feel? You don't even know anymore. When you're in a toxic relationship, this disconnection from yourself doesn't happen abruptly. It's gradual, sneaky, almost imperceptible until you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person you see. This is one of the deepest and most devastating effects of these relationships, the erosion of identity. Erich Fromm called it symbiotic fusion, a state where two people cease to exist as individuals and become an indistinct emotional entity. It's the kind of relationship where everything revolves around the other. Their mood dictates your day, her crises control your decisions. You start to shape your behavior to avoid conflicts. You recalculate every sentence before speaking. You give up little things, one after another, until nothing is left that is just yours. And this is where Freud comes in, with his concept of ego repression. When we are caught in a dynamic where pleasing the other is a matter of emotional survival, we begin to repress our own impulses. We silence our anger. We ignore our discomfort. We suppress our desires. Over time, we become only what the other needs or demands us to be. This disconnection also manifests in subtle ways. You start dressing differently, distancing yourself from people who were once important, abandoning projects that excited you, all in the name of harmony. But in reality, you are slowly fading away. You are ceasing to exist to keep the relationship alive. And that is a price too high. The most dangerous part is that this loss of identity does not cause an obvious pain. It manifests as emptiness, apathy, a chronic feeling that something is wrong, but you can't name it. And when you try to regain your autonomy, when you try to set boundaries, guilt arises. You feel selfish for wanting space, for wanting time just for yourself, for saying no. And this is exactly what we will talk about in the next part. How in toxic relationships, the simple desire for autonomy is transformed into emotional sin, and how guilt becomes a tool of control. In a healthy relationship, space is a natural necessity. Silence is allowed. Solitude is respected. Having boundaries is not seen as rejection. It is recognized as part of building a mature relationship. But in a toxic relationship, something essential transforms into something forbidden. The desire for space turns into accusation. Silence becomes a threat. Autonomy becomes selfishness. And what arises from this? Guilt. You start to feel bad for wanting to sleep alone, for not responding to a message immediately, for going out with friends without needing to explain every detail. The idea of prioritizing yourself makes you uncomfortable, as if loving yourself were a betrayal to the other. The most insidious part is that often, this guilt is not imposed explicitly. It is subtly implanted through glances, silences, emotional manipulations like, "You've changed," "You don't care about me anymore," or the dreaded, "If it were the other way around, I would never do this to you." Freud describes this process as the operation of the punitive superego, an instance of the psyche that internalizes criticisms and authoritarian rules, making the individual feel constantly guilty for satisfying their own needs. And in toxic relationships, this superego is reinforced every day by the partner's behavior. Over time, you learn to anticipate guilt, to censor yourself even before expressing a desire, to deny your own will to avoid the emotional weight that comes afterward. It's like living in a system of psychological surveillance, where every step must be calculated to avoid triggering the other's emotional reaction. And the effect of this is brutal. You stop breathing deeply, stop relaxing, stop existing naturally. You become an edited version of yourself, always available, always present, always alert. And behind this forced submission lies the unconscious belief that to love is to nullify oneself. But what if you stop feeling responsible for maintaining the other's emotional stability? What if the guilt you carry isn't yours? That's the question that leads us to the next point. When you not only feel guilty for distancing yourself, but start to see yourself as emotionally responsible for the other's suffering. When you believe you cannot leave because their pain would be too great. If what you've heard here sounds familiar, my ebook, Beyond the Shadow, goes even deeper. It explores the unconscious patterns behind toxic love and gives you tools to break this cycle. The link is in the pinned comment. Have you ever thought about leaving? Have you mentally rehearsed breakup conversations? Have you imagined moving on with your life, rebuilding yourself? But something holds you back. Something stronger than the fear of loneliness, more paralyzing than guilt, the suffering of the other. Their pain becomes the invisible chain that keeps you in the relationship. And it's not just about empathy. It's about distorted emotional responsibility. Carrying the weight of the other as if it were your own. You tell yourself, I can't abandon them now. They are going through so much. They only act this way because they have suffered a lot. And so, you transform the role of partner into caregiver. And if the other shows fragility, if they threaten to crumble, you become even more necessary. This creates a dangerous illusion that your presence is the only emotional foundation supporting that person, that your absence would be a form of cruelty. But is this love? Or is it emotional imprisonment disguised as compassion? Carl Jung pointed to this phenomenon when discussing unconscious identification with archetypes, especially that of the martyr. When you cling to the pain of the other to the point of forgetting yourself, you are living an archetypal narrative, the savior who gives up everything to heal the other, even if, in the process, they destroy themselves. And what seems noble actually masks a deep disconnection with one's own worth. Erich Fromm also described this as a form of neurotic love, one that persists not out of conscious choice, but out of fear, need, emotional addiction. You are not there because you want to be. You are there because you feel you have to be. And with that, the suffering of the other becomes a form of manipulation, even if unconscious. Every tear, every outburst, every emotional collapse reinforces your obligation to stay. But here's the hard truth to accept. You are not responsible for healing the pain that the other refuses to face. Your presence does not save anyone. Often, it merely postpones the inevitable collapse for both. And the cruelest part is that while you cling to the pain of the other, something familiar hides behind this dynamic. The feeling of reliving something old. As if that relationship, no matter how dysfunctional, echoed childhood memories, patterns already lived. And that's why it feels strangely right. In the next section, we will explore just that. Why, even saying you don't want to suffer anymore, you end up repeating exactly the same patterns that hurt you in the past and call it fate. Have you ever wondered why certain relationships seem to follow the same script, even when the people change? As if you were living the same story with new characters. You promise yourself that this time will be different, that now you know what to avoid. But somehow, everything repeats itself. The same pains, the same absences, the same silences that scream. This is not a coincidence, it's a pattern. And according to Freud, it has a name: compulsion to repeat. In psychoanalysis, this compulsion is an unconscious mechanism that leads us to seek and repeat unresolved childhood pain. Not out of masochism, but as an unconscious attempt to rewrite the past, to live the same scene, but with a different ending. You may have grown up with emotional absence, rejection, instability, and now, as an adult, you are drawn precisely to those who offer you more of the same, because unconsciously, you believe that this time, it will be different. This time, you will be loved. This time, you will not be abandoned. Freud also described the phenomenon of transference, the tendency to transfer to current figures feelings that originally belonged to figures from the past, such as parents or caregivers. That's why you might fall in love with someone emotionally unavailable, not because you like to suffer, but because this unavailability activates an old emotional memory. And deep down, something inside you believes that if you can win the love of this new figure, you will finally heal an old wound. The problem is that this rarely happens. On the contrary, the more you try to change the script, the more trapped you become. Because you are not dealing with the present. You are trying to heal the past with emotional tools that have already proven to be flawed. And while you try to rescue the wounded child within you, the adult you are fades away, exhausts, breaks. And this is where the darkest aspect of this pattern comes in. You start to think that pain is normal, that discomfort is part of love, that healthy relationships are boring because they don't activate your triggers. Toxicity becomes your comfort zone. But even when you realize all this, even when you understand that you are trapped in a destructive cycle, you still hesitate to leave. Why? Because there is something even more frightening than repeating the pain, the emptiness of not knowing who you would be without it. And it is exactly about this fear that we will talk in the final part. Have you ever thought about leaving? Have you visualized your life without that person? Have you caught yourself fantasizing about silence, about peace, about the freedom to be who you are without fear of judgment, without guilt, without tension? But soon after comes the emptiness, a coldness in your chest, a whispered but persistent question. What if I am nothing without him? What if I never find someone again? What if this suffering is all that's left for me? This fear is real, and it is one of the most paralyzing. In many cases, it has nothing to do with the love you feel for the other, but with the deep disconnection you have with yourself. Jung spoke about this when addressing the fragile ego and the lack of individuation. When your identity is fused with the relationship, leaving it feels like leaving you formless, structureless, as if the other were your only mirror. Without him, who are you? And Fromm complements this reasoning by stating that many people love not for freedom, but for escape. Escape from the existential fear of being alone. Escape from confronting themselves. Escape from the silence, which so often echoes questions we avoid our whole lives. This kind of love is not a choice. It is anesthesia. You stay, even knowing that the relationship is destroying you, because the emptiness seems scarier than the pain. Because on some level, you believe that the known suffering is preferable to the unknown of starting over. And this is not cowardice. It is a reflection of an old wound. The one of never having learned to feel whole while being alone. And perhaps no one taught you this. To be with yourself without abandoning yourself. To respect your limits without feeling guilty. To love yourself without depending on another to feel alive. But the truth is, you will only be able to live a true love when you no longer need to lose yourself to be with someone. Relationships should not crush you or fragment you. They should expand who you are. If that is not happening, maybe it's time to stop asking what is wrong with you and start asking yourself why you still call this love. You deserve something better. But before seeking outside, you need to find within. Courage is not leaving without pain. Courage is staying true to yourself, even when everything outside tries to make you forget who you are. Now I want to know from you, which of these parts confronted you the most? Which made you see something that might have been hidden? Share in the comments. Sometimes, writing is already the first step to breaking the cycle. And if this video brought you clarity, don't stop here. The next video is just as important as this one, perhaps even more. It will show you another piece of this puzzle. Your journey to liberation is just beginning.